I firmly believe there are very few bad quirks in MHA. Only bad users. Or perhaps it's better to say people who don't fully understand or conceptualize the true usefulness of their quirks. There's actually some pretty compelling evidence that quirks can change and grow as the user's understanding and familiarity with the power grows in turn. We saw this with Kirishima realizing that by using his power over and over, the shell he creates becomes stronger and even changes his physical appearance quite drastically. This is also apparent in Mirio, who is able to more freely control his permeation with practice, to the point that he is competent enough to take on multiple villains at once. And possibly the most compelling piece of evidence being that of Deku himself. That being said, I only felt it was fitting to start with a person very near and dear to Deku that has a potentially powerful quirk, but due to one reason or another is underdeveloped. So without further ado, Inko. In many ways, her unwillingness to train her quirk in the first place is pretty understandable. She's known to have fits of hysteria and mood swings, especially in connection with Deku and his current status. In fact, they share many personality tics, most likely associated with the fact that Inko was, for the most part, the only familial role model Deku had growing up. But this isn't a video about Deku. I only mention those things so as to try to understand her reasons for not training her attraction type quirk. In her younger years, we know she is quite emotional and is relatively down to earth, so she probably didn't idolize heroes in the same way we see a lot of other people do. In fact, that's one of the qualities I most respect about her character. But later, that grounded personality led her to being very protective over Deku, and raising him as a pseudo-single parent, further keeping her from training her own quirk. But there is a third reason I feel is also rooted in this non-committal attitude towards training. That grounded personality has also led her to being a realist, leaning a little toward pessimism and distrust in the current hero society, which we see voiced when she at first refuses to allow Deku to move into the dorms. She values personal safety of herself and Deku over the safety of the whole. It's not a bad stance to have in itself, but it doesn't do anything to improve the chances of her ever becoming a hero in her own right. But what if she had none of that holding her back? What exactly is the extent of what she could have become as a hero? The main attributes that need to be covered are the three whats of her quirk. By that I mean, what do we need to grow her quirk into something more useful? What are the limitations that can reasonably be placed on the quirk at the end of that growth? And what are ways that the quirk can be used? I think the first what is pretty easy to cover. Largely the downsides of her quirk are in how she herself visualizes the use case of her quirk. She blatantly states that it only works on small objects and at a fairly slow pace at that. I think this can be brought back to her personality again. She sees herself as average and normal, more solidly grounded than many that idolize hero society. First, she would need to get past that mental block that her quirk is only this thing, much like Mirio and Kirishima did. Thus, practice. Practice is the second biggest constraint that she has on her quirk. Quirks have been shown to work like muscles. The more they're used, the more likely they are to get more effective and easy to grow the parameters of the quirk. So by slowly working on the size of the object she draws on, I think it's a very valid assumption to say that she would be able to increase the mass of the item she pulled upon. The same can be said of the speed at which she is able to attract the item toward herself. With the size and speed increase, her confidence in both her quirk and her own viability as a hero would increase proportionally. I'm more against her being able to use both equally well at all times. At that point, I feel it becomes a little too powerful. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but I see it this way. Largely, I don't want to build up a quirk that is going to be intrinsically a showstopper. I want it to be functional, and even powerful in its own right. But I don't want it to approach ungodly levels of power, so in this case, I don't want Inko to be capable of pulling buildings out of their foundation and steamrolling a villain into a bloody paste. It takes a lot of tension out of the series if you have this small, homely woman just appearing and ending a fight with no issue at all. It works in One Punch Man because that's the whole point of it. He's meant to be blatantly overpowered to make the humor work in the first place. MHA, for the large majority, isn't meant to be a comedic series. We are supposed to feel that tension and unease on who will be standing at the end of the fight. For that reason, no universe-breaking powers outside of the already prevalent All for One and One for All. And with that, I think we can safely move on to the next what's. What should be logical limitations on her quirk, and how does she use it? These can largely be answered at the same time, as one relies on the other depending on the context of how the quirk is trained to be stronger, and in how those limitations exist and how it can be used as well. I think this answer is a little more abstract and thus more open to scrutiny. So this is largely based on my own perception of what we've seen of other quirks that have shown a level of scalability. Honestly, I can see this going one of two ways. Either she would learn to increase the speed of small objects to high velocity, therefore negating the need to move large objects in itself. This would lead very much more towards her becoming a fighter than a support or rescue type hero. Imagine her having a setup similar to Minato by placing a large number of items around the city. This means that as long as she has a line of sight with the villain, she could pull the item toward them and hit them from behind at high speeds even as she attacks from the front. This would of course take high levels of dexterity and keeping in mind the placement of her weapons, but this is anime, so I'm going to lean more toward allowing it as a human possibility. The second possible scenario I see her doing is by training the size and mass of the objects she can move. This leans away from her being a fighter, but I think this actually goes better with her personality anyways. While I think the first is cooler from a main character point of view, Inko isn't a main character. Imagine a hero able to telepathically move large objects encountering the rescue portion of the provisional exam. She would receive high marks for being able to move the rebel and free the trapped and endangered civilians. This goes well with her protector type of personality, in my opinion. Another thing I think is important to think about is who she would potentially have good synergy with. Because just as it's important to think of her own potential as a hero, it's also important in the hero world to be able to mix and match with other heroes on the fly, depending on who is nearby and able to respond to threats. Of course, we have the very obvious choice of Deku. Yeah, Deku. They've had a lifetime of experiences together, and I don't think anyone other than Bakugo and possibly All Might have a better understanding of the kind of person Deku is. I even think that her maternal instincts could be a good counterbalance to Deku's more self-sacrificing nature. Other than familiar relations, I also think that pairing with rescue heroes is also a good choice. People like 13. While 13's quirk allows her to pull on items indiscriminately, Inko's quirk appears to be a bit more focused and localized on just one object at a time. So with 13's more brute forcing with a lighter hand from Inko, I think they pair pretty nicely. And since no hero is complete without one important thing, what do you guys think her hero name should be? I'm not nearly creative enough to come up with one on my own, so tell me what you think down below. What do you guys think? How viable do you see Inko and her quirk as a potential hero? I'm always willing to discuss the finer points. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. I'm getting back into the swing of things, and all the support I can get gives me the warm and fuzzies. And with that, have a great day, my dudes.